Hello and welcome back to another video. I've got something pretty exciting to share with you today. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you would know that I've been pretty on and off with film photography, mainly due to the lack of motivation when using my old medium format film camera, my Pentax 67. You may also know that I recently sold my Pentax 67 along with the extension tubes that I bought for the system. Using the money that I got from the sales, I ended up buying a Samyang 50mm f1.4 for my Sony a7 III, but I ended up just not liking the lens whatsoever, so I returned it. After purchasing and returning that lens, I realised that I would just want something that's fun rather than something that's technically brilliant. I knew what I wanted right away, and after searching on eBay for a few days, I found a really good deal. And after finding that deal, I purchased my new medium format film camera, the Mamiya RB67 with the 90mm f3.8 lens in near mint condition. The camera arrived shortly after I purchased it and I began taking photos right away. But before I show you the photos, I want to quickly talk about why I bought this particular camera. Like I said before, I was feeling very unmotivated while using my Pentax 67. While the results that I got were decent for the most part, and the camera and lens itself were great and high quality, I just felt like I was missing something. The thing that the Pentax was missing for me was that medium format magic. I spoke about this before, but personally I like to use medium format cameras that are unique and feel different to use. But the Pentax was lacking that for me, as it essentially was just an oversized SLR. So that is one reason why I picked up the RB67. Another reason why I chose the RB67 over another 120 film camera was because of the RZ67. I've said it a million times before and I will say it a million times again, the Mamiya RZ67 is my favourite camera of all time. It's the camera that got me into film photography, reignited my drive when I was losing interest in photography, and I've taken some of my favourite photos ever on the camera. Sadly, I don't think I will ever own a Mamiya RZ67 as they are very expensive and they have some very old electronic components that could go wrong and render the camera useless. Maybe one day if I have the money spare and I'm willing to take the risk, I may buy an RZ67. But for now, I wanted a camera that could get me as close to the RZ67 as possible, but without having to, worry about the electronics or pay a ridiculous amount of money. And what better way to do that than to go with the RZ67's older brother, the Mamiya RB67. So yeah, those are the two reasons why I purchased this Mamiya RB67. Anyway, as I said before, I started taking photos right away, and my first role was just to test if the camera was fully operational. Then I used it at a shoot that I made a video about a couple weeks ago, and finally I brought it with me to Wales when I went around Snowdonia for the first time. I also made a video about going to Snowdonia and it's performing quite badly, so after this video, could you go and give that a watch, because that would be amazing. Anyway, now that I've had more use of this camera, I feel comfortable talking about my first impressions. I'll do this in a classic pros and cons format, so I can be honest about what I like and what I don't like. Right, let's just get into it and I'll start off with the pros. So my first pro or good impression of this camera definitely has to be the fun factor. Using this camera brings me so much joy. It's given me that medium format magic back that I've been missing for such a long time. Everything from the sound it makes when taking a photo to loading the film. The camera is exactly what I've been needing for such a long time. Like I mentioned before, with the Pentax 67 I felt quite uninspired. But with this RB67, I just want to go out and take photos thanks to how fun it is and thanks to that medium format magic. My second good impression has to be the user experience that comes along with this camera. I was going to break this one down into two different pros, but I feel like they work better together as user experience. So the user experience of this camera is just delightful. Thanks to the unique nature of this camera, the experience is unlike anything else I've used other than an RZ67. From the waist level viewfinder giving you that unique perspective of your subjects, to the winding mechanism that advances the film. The camera is truly unique and it's unlike any other camera system. If you have never used a waist level viewfinder camera, then you are missing out. I remember when I first ever used a waist level finder camera, I was so confused as my eyes couldn't adjust to what I was seeing. It's like looking at the world with more depth, like a 3D effect, but even though it's 3D normally, it's really weird and you're looking at it from a completely different perspective to what you're used to seeing. I genuinely just can't describe it because it's just that weird to see. It's something that I think every film photographer needs to experience because it's just so unique and surreal to look at. And I mentioned the winding mechanism before, and you may be wondering why. Well, the RB67 has a very unique winding mechanism. I'm not going to try and explain it, you can just look at it yourself and just admire it. My third pro or good first impression of this camera is how you load the film. This is a quite mundane one, I can't lie. Most people don't care about how you load film into a camera, but it's quite important to me. Since when you shoot medium format film cameras, you've only got a handful of shots before you finish your roll, you're loading film quite often. And I found that when I don't enjoy loading a camera, I don't enjoy shooting as much. For instance, with my Pentax 67, I absolutely hated loading it. I've spoken about it multiple times before, but for some reason I could never get to grips with loading that camera. It's weird though, since I've owned a Mamiya 7 and they're loaded in pretty much an identical way, and I was completely fine loading that camera. But for some reason, I just absolutely hated loading the Pentax. Anyway, this camera is a completely different story. The way you load this camera is completely different to the 35mm style loading of the Mamiya 7 and the Pentax 67. Loading this camera is the definition of medium format magic. It's a joy to do, it's super unique, and it's really easy as well. You basically open up the back of the camera, take the film spool holder out, load your film directly onto the film spool holder, put it in the back of the camera, and then you're done. It sounds really boring when you talk about it, but when you actually do it, it's a completely different experience. This video is already going to be quite long, so I'm going to bundle these last few ones into one section pro thing called medium format magic. And these last few things are the bellows focusing, the rotating back, and the settings being on the lens. To sum it up as quickly as I can, the bellows focusing system means that you won't be focusing like your standard film camera. The lenses for this system have no moving focusing parts, so instead of focusing by turning the lens, you have to focus by moving the lens back and forth using the bellows. It's the same focusing system that large format cameras use, and it also means that you can focus extremely close, like I'm talking a few centimeters. The rotating back means that you can go from portrait orientation to landscape orientation or vice versa just by rotating the back where the film is. This means that you don't need to buy a eye-level prism to be able to take portrait orientation photos, which is a big problem with waist-level viewfinder cameras. Since waist-level viewfinders are back to front, if you try and take a photo in portrait orientation without a camera that doesn't have a rotating film back, then you're going to have a lot of issues. This is because left will be right and up will be down, and when you're holding the camera like this, it just gets even more confusing. I can't explain it, it just really boggles your mind and just messes up your senses. But thanks to the rotating back, that is no longer an issue, and it means that you don't have to buy a prism finder when trying to take portrait orientation images. And finally, the shutter speed and aperture being on the lens means it's a lot harder to make mistakes with your exposure when the light changes and you forget to change your settings. This is a mistake that I made a lot of the time when using the RZ67, since the shutter speeds on that camera are located on the body, and a lot of the time I'd be too engrossed in taking a photo than, to look at my settings for just a few seconds. So quite a few of my images with that camera were underexposed or overexposed, and it's definitely a rookie mistake, but having the settings on the lens definitely makes sure that you aren't going to make that mistake. Right, that's all of the pros done, now let's get onto the cons or bad first impressions. There are only two of them, so this won't take long at all. My main issue with this camera system is the lens selection. If you know me, then you know that I like to shoot wide open a lot of the time to get that super shallow depth of field, like 3D effect in my images. But the lenses for the RB67 don't open as wide as I would have liked. I knew that they didn't, but it's still just an issue that I would like to talk about. The lens that I have is the 90mm f3.8, and it's a very nice lens and has some good bokeh. But after using the 110 2.8 on the RZ67 and the 105 2.4 on the Pentax 67, I feel like I'm just missing out on that slightly shallower depth of field. My light has just run out of battery, we're gonna have to do the rest of this video without it, sorry about that. Anyway, I know it's not that big of a difference, but it's just bugging me that the shallowest I can go on the RB67 is 3.5. I think that I could potentially combat this by using the 127mm f3.8, since that extra compression might make the images pop that slight bit more. My second and final con of the RB67 is how heavy and awkward it is. I obviously knew this when I bought the camera, as I've used an RZ67 many times before, but it's just something to remember before you buy an RB67 or an RZ67. The camera is heavy, and while that isn't actually that bad, the main problem is that the camera is just a box, so it's quite awkward to hold. This, along with the weight, creates an unwanted amount of strain on your hands and your arms when you're walking around with the camera. I do think I will purchase a strap in the future, because that is what helped me use the RZ67 for multiple hours at a time. Anyway, that concludes my pros and cons, or first impressions, of the RB67. Overall, I am very happy with my purchase, and I am looking forward to creating more work in the future. I don't think this camera will ever be my favourite medium format film camera, purely because of the lens selection, but I do think it will be a close second or third. That's the end of this video. It was a super long one, and if you've stuck around this far, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.